When I directed my first film, I realized that there's much more to being a film director than meets the eye. And I didn't just want to jump in, I wanted to feel prepared. So, in this video, I'm going to share 5 things I wish I had known before directing my first film, which I've gotten to know and learn over the last 20 years. I will also be sharing a full take from my film All In, so you get a look behind the scenes, what actually goes on, the commands, the AD, and so on. So stay tuned for that. If you're a film director, you have so many things on your plate, so many people wanting something from you at one point or another, that it's important to know what your job is, what your duties entail, and also what your job isn't. So, because your plate will be full enough. So that's also why I'm coming back to the overview video, which I'll link here. Start with that if you haven't watched that already. That's why I'm recommending in this overview video that I'm linking having a core team of at least 3 people that are in charge. You as the director, a DP, a director of photography, which means the head of camera, and ideally a sound person. And if you don't want to produce yourself, then maybe one of the other 2 wants to produce, or we might even have a 4th person producing, but that's a luxury. So for me, all my films that I've done to this point, I was one of the producers. Why? Not because I love it so much, but because it's kind of part of the game. If you are not in the luxurious position of having a big producer be interested in your project and actually wanting to take on the role of producer, which is a big ask. So that's how many filmmakers start out. Instead of waiting around, they just do it themselves. And for me, I always knew that when the time came to scale up, to make a bigger project, if I had to choose between directing and producing, I would always choose directing. And there's projects of a certain scope where you shouldn't be doing both, or where if you are doing both, you should have someone that's just dedicated to producing as well. Number 1 is you need to know your concept inside and out. You need to know your characters, your story, your whole visual idea, because film is a visual medium. So people of you as a director, they expect that you have thought about, like, what do you want the sets to look like? What do you want the costumes to feel like? What do you want the visual style to be? What do you want the soundtrack to be? That comes a bit later generally, but still people will look to you for guidance, because it's ultimately up to you. So you have to be prepared even before getting on set, that people will come to you with all sorts of questions, and most of them are also legitimate questions, because you're the creative head of the project, and that means someone has to tell them what the whole feel, the genre, the look of the film is supposed to be like. That's all you. That doesn't mean that you dictate to anyone. So when it comes to working with head of departments are, the head of sound, head of camera, head of wardrobe, head of production design, you get the picture. So for every department, there's a head, and the director usually works with them way in advance of shooting. That's why you have to calculate in some time between working on your script. And I also mentioned this in another video. You have to first make your script as good as you possibly can before moving on to pre-production, and you shouldn't rush it. So I know there are videos on YouTube saying you can write a short film in 1 day and then shoot it the following weekend. Of course you can. The question is just how well thought through this project is going to be. That's just why my approach is give your film at least 3 months if you want to make your first short. That's my philosophy. Working with head of department is crucial. And for that, you first need to get into the script. So let's assume that you have a script that you've maybe co-written or written by yourself, then it's way easier because you've already thought of the whole world and the characters. It's all based on your ideas, right? So then the breakdown of the script is more technical. It's more like, okay, you go into even more detail, but you already know the backstories of the characters and all that, ideally. So you make a breakdown of the script, which means the first interpretation of the script is by you, the director. So it's even more complicated if someone else wrote the script, then you have to talk to the writer a great deal to make sure you don't misunderstand or miss anything from the story, because certain things are only implied in the screenplay, but like the backstory doesn't always make it to the final page. So that's why you really have to have an understanding of where the writer comes from and what their backstory thoughts are. An example for this is Steve Clowes, who adapted the Harry Potter books, all but one, for the films. And I wrote my bachelor thesis on whether to write your original screenplay or adapt it from famous work of fiction like Harry Potter. And so I studied all the interviews that he gave on his writing process and also his discussions with J.K. Rowling. And so he really was in a fortunate position at the time to be allowed to have certain knowledge of what was happening in the following books that were not published yet, because it was important for the films to get them right. So I imagine also something about Snape might have come up there. If you know, you know. If you don't, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But anyway, the point is, as the screenwriter, you have certain knowledge that if you're not directing as well as writing, the director doesn't have that knowledge. So, and in his case, even if you're adapting, that's another level of interpretation. So basically, you as a director, you interpret in your own way, which also means that your whole view of the world comes into play when you're making a film. It's a very personal journey and also emotional at times, but also beautiful. So it's all about, okay, I'm reading the script, what translates for me, what doesn't, what really jumps off the page, and maybe also which parts would I want to rewrite. So if you're not the writer of the script, but you're the director, you also have the option to change something about the script. Of course, it's also down to negotiations, how much you're allowed to change. And there's stories of directors getting on board projects and getting off board again. But in general, you as the director, you interpret the script. That's the first step that you have to do. Once you've done that and you have a good idea of what the story is about, what the characters are about, and the inner journey of each character, especially the main ones, you can start to look for your team. And of course, if it's a big project, your producer will have a say in that, like who can we afford and so on. With the first project, the finances are down to you or your 3 people, your core team. So you also have all the say. That's the beautiful thing about no budget or low budget filmmaking. So you pick your people that you want to work with as your head of departments. And then you have discussions with them one-on-one first. I always start with the camera person because I think it's very important that camera and directing are on the same page in terms of visual style. Like, do we want to have a lot of motion shots, handheld, dolly, which is the moving camera, and so on, or do we want to have it more traditional on a C-stand like I'm doing now? So those are discussions that need to happen before heading to a location scout and stuff, in my opinion. Because if you are on the same page with your DP, It's a lot of your shoulders and also of his or hers. And you just know that you can also discuss these creative processes together in terms of blocking. Blocking means where to put the camera on set. You have to make a shot list for every scene once you've scouted your locations and know what the location offers. So that's why you should make your shot list after having seen the locations. People working with the mood boards are usually like production design, costume, camera, all sorts of departments really that are into the visual aspect of filmmaking, which of course is a big one. So once you've set up all your contacts with your head of department and had intense talks on your film and each scene, so it's an extensive process if you take it seriously, then you can also, of course, think about casting and working with actors. So before you approach any actors, you should know yourself what you want from this part, from this role, from this character, what's important to you about the character. So you, once you meet the actors, you can get that point across quickly and know also if it's a good fit in casting. So that's why understanding your characters first is crucial. Those things that I mentioned up until now all happen before you get on set. If you're casting actors, one tip that I have is always let them play the scene first without giving too much direction. Just let them run free. And then if they've done their run, the first run, correct them. Even if you thought it was perfect, because it's not about it being perfect or not, it's about if they listen to you or not. Because I've had the experience, I've made the experience of people really not listening to me one bit during casting. And if it doesn't happen during casting, that's not a good precedent for hiring someone. So that's why it's an important test for me. If I correct them, of course, it does have to make some sense to them, what you want them to change, but always give some pointers what you would like them to change to make sure they are able to understand you, they get along with you, and actually put into action what you want from them, because that's kind of the key about you being the director. You should actually really talk to each actor separately that got the part about their role, about their character. What questions do they have? Of course, first of all, give them the full script, because usually at casting stage they don't yet have the full script. I mean, I for one am never sending out full scripts before hiring someone, but that's just me. But copyright and stuff is a whole different subject. If you want me to cover that in some other video, please comment below. First, of course, they need to receive your full script, and then give them some time to look it over and schedule a meeting with them. And if they don't have any questions, that's also not a good sign. So be positive they understand their character and the backstory, and also give them the character bio. There's a free template you can grab from me to write your next character bio. So if that doesn't exist yet, you should absolutely write one for each main character, because that's really vital. And also, like now, the actors can use it. So I've done this every single time with all of my films, and the actors are very appreciative if you actually have taken the time to delve deep into character development. Point out some things that they might have missed, because if you read a script for the first time, you're going to miss some things. That's natural. So it's down to you as the director to make sure they completely get the character. And if the actor is a little bit ambitious, they might also do their own research. They should. And maybe you can point out certain things or also resources where they might find some information on the character. Collaboration is a big one, as you can tell. Another one is, of course, that you're in charge. You're the motivator of the whole crew and cast. So whenever on set, you have to lead by example. You have to be in good spirits most of the time, please. My first assistant director job was on a theater production when I was in 11th grade, when we were doing a big theater production. And we did have a teacher that was actually a professional theater director, but this guy had a temper that was just awful. So he didn't make people feel comfortable, and that was kind of a problem. So whatever you do, don't have an attitude and be positive, be motivational, and also give people a clear understanding of what's expected of them on each day of shooting and also before that. It's still teamwork making a film. Even though I'm talking about the director today a lot, you wouldn't be anywhere without your team and without directors. So you have to bear that in mind. Your job as director entails so many things, from motivating people to knowing exactly what your vision entails, to collaborating with your head of department and everyone on set really, and your actors, to being fully present and being a resource of inspiration and motivation to everyone. It also comes with perks, of course, because you can also lead your team to ideally have your vision come to fruition, which actually is a great honor if it works. And I've had the privilege of experiencing that on my films. But it does take trust, and trust needs to be earned. So that's why I cannot emphasize enough that you should never dictate. You should try to understand where the other person is coming from and have lots of patience and be also clear in what you're willing to compromise on and what you're not willing to compromise on. So now let's have a look at that raw take that I promised in the intro, so you get to see for yourself what goes on.
Gut. Merit, laute Ansage bitte. Glocke jetzt unten laut.
Okay.
Ja.
Okay.
Okay.
Also, Ruhe bitte, wir drehen.
Läuft immer noch.
Szene 18, Take 5.
Kamera set.
Und bitte.
Ey, wer hätte gedacht, dass so ein Boxspiel so viel Spaß machen kann?
Du hast dich auch wirklich nicht schlecht geschlagen für den Anfang.
Hey, danke schön, danke. Du bist gar nicht so ein Vollassi, wie ich zuerst dachte.
Ebenso, lieber.
In diesem Sinne, bis morgen.
Okay, bis dann.
Bis dann.
Danke.
Once you end the take by saying cut, you have to decide, and everyone will look to you to tell them, are we going again? So are we doing the same thing all over again because you want something to be different, you're not happy with the take, or are we moving on? So that means we're moving on to the next shot or the next scene. So the AD, the assistant director, is looking to you because you're the only one that gets to decide this. Of course, you have to listen to an actor that says, well, I really messed up that line, I really didn't like it at all. You have to respect that and at least talk to them if you don't agree. Can of course reassure them, but you shouldn't just ignore them. Same goes for camera. If the assistant camera, for instance, says, well, I messed up focus at one point, you have to do another take unless you already have 3 and they were okay. So you will go again for camera in that case. And if like sound says, I actually had an airplane that was flying over, we cannot use sound from this take. Same goes for sound. So then you tell the AD, okay, sound wants another take. Then the AD will say, going again for sound. And then if it's a big set, the PAs will repeat that so everyone knows what's going on. That's very, very important. Always have everyone in the know what's going on, because that gives clarity, it increases motivation, and it just avoids confusion. So that's key. If you are unhappy with the performance, you have to talk to your actors, and I recommend you do that. Like if it's a minor thing, you can just say it in front of everyone. But if you really think that things are going south, you have to be proactive and try to sort it out with them by talking one-on-one with them. In that case, I would suggest you just tell the AD it's a 10-minute break for everyone, so everyone can go grab a drink, and then it's a low-key thing to talk to your actor, and there's less pressure on everyone involved. Since as a director, it's so much about working with people, it does help if you get to know all your people in advance, or if you already know them. Of course, in the beginning, making your first film, you have to get to know them first. But my advice is really to take the time to do that. Because on set, if there's tension, there's nothing worse than having tension on set, believe me. You really have to make sure that the mood is good, the whole vibe is good, spirits are up. And how do you do that? By making sure the actors have room to breathe, and everyone else as well, if possible. There's good food, enough breaks. There's a clear understanding for everyone what happens when, which is the AD's job, but still, like, you as a director are completely screwed if the mood is not good. Because how are you expecting people to do their best work if they're not motivated, if they don't know what's going on, if they are exhausted, and all those things? So basically, making a film is not one of those jobs where people should just do the minimum. If they do, it will show in the end result, and you really don't want to show that film around if that's the case. So your goal as a director, and of course also the other, like production is also interested in that, is to make people strive for excellence, to be so motivated and so taken by the project and so on board with every creative decision, ideally, that they want to give it their best all the time. That's when you excel as a team, and that's when it shows on screen. So that's my last tip of the day. Thank you very much for watching. If you've learned something in this video so far, please consider subscribing. Get my free character bio template in the link below. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time. Bye.